Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right, in fact, with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, key question for us today. Where are you on Nate Moore's beard?
I didn't even notice it, so.
So that's tough but fair. But,
sorry, Nate.
But the scruff is coming in. Nate, are you willing to disclose? Is this a beard project or is this just
gone home for a couple weeks and I like to see where I'm at, see what happens.
He's exploring his beard situation as he get ready to go out west for ruggedness. Okay, so we're giving you a pass. Have I told you about my youngest man-child's summer hair experiment?
No.
A mullet.
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really turned into a thing.
Well, get it out of your system while you're 11 years old.
Yeah. Well, he's 13. I'll have you know. And he is away at camp right now, and I hope that his mullet is getting him all sorts of respect from his fellow campers.
Shall we?
We shall. We
all
must.
Right.
Nay, we must.
We got to get to our front page. Where we're going to talk about the Democratic campaign.
We got 80. We're at this recording. We have 89 days until Election Day. And
Politico Playbook is here to answer why Kamala Harris hasn't sat for an interview.
Why not?
It's not Occam's razor, you know.
Yeah. Why hasn't she? Does she have a cold?
It's been 3 or so weeks since she's been the presumptive Democratic nominee, and then now officially the Democratic nominee for president. No interviews, no press conferences, and they write, Harris is starting to face more questions about why she isn't doing more press, which are only bound to grow louder. Our West Wing Playbook colleagues report that her campaign is thinking about setting up a big joint interview with her and Walz. They're thinking about it. But they're generally skeptical that such moments provide much electoral value. Now why?
Why?
What we don't get is any analysis of why they think she might not get value out of doing a major nationally televised interview. Because she sucks at improvisation.
The lead is, there's a line from the movie Bull Durham where Crash Davis, the sage journeyman catcher played by Kevin Costner, tells Nuke LaLoosh, the young fireballer portrayed by Tim Robbins, that you never mess with a winning streak. The same holds true for politics. Whose job is it to make Kamala Harris do an interview?
It's unbelievable.
It's our job.
Every day should be, we requested an interview. We haven't gotten one. These are the questions we want to put to her.
And yet, this is the Politico-ification of politics. If it's good politically, then it's good, right? If it's politically astute and it helps you win, then it's good. But it's bad.
They won't even tell you why it's politically astute.
Yeah,
of course it's politically astute for her not to do interviews because she's bad at them.
Right.
So they don't even say. She has a long, her major political screw-ups, her worst political moments on the national stage have come in town halls and in interviews. At the CNN town hall in 2019, she said, it's time to ban fracking, 100%. In an interview with Lester Holt, that will live in infamy, he said, so you're the border czar, or you're in charge of the border now, but you haven't traveled there. And her response was, well, I haven't been to Europe either. It was in another off-the-cuff moment where she endorsed Medicare for all. That's why she's not doing interviews. But we have no reminder of that. Just they think this is a really good strategy.
Well, J.D. Vance volunteered to help shame the press, and did his They were both in. I think this was this both in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They were both. He's in the parlance of politics, bracketing her and going about to try to get in on the attention for her and her new running mate, Tim Walz. And so J.D. Vance did a little stunto. He walked over to her plane, asked to talk to her, and then came back and tried to basically shame reporters, and which is not a bad tactic, right? Because regardless of what's in this Politico piece, there is a little frustration and shame among the press corps that Kamala Harris continues to get away with.
It's embarrassing for them.
Yeah. And their personal, whatever biases are underneath, their personal ambition and vocational pride is offended by the fact, and everybody would like to get it. So there's this weird thing that's going on. You don't want to attack her for not doing interviews, because the surest way to not get an interview is to attack her for not doing the interview. If you're ABC News and you do a whole piece on why she's not doing interviews, she's not going to go to ABC News for the interview. So they're sucking up and trying to pressure her at the same time. So Vance came back and told them, I thought you guys might get lonely because the vice president doesn't answer questions from reporters and hasn't for 17 days. And then he says how willing he is to do it. And of course, we should point out here that J.D. Vance then ruined it. It was a decent stunt that he then ruined by two things. One, he was like, wanted to take a look at my plane, going to see my plane. You're like, all right, settle down. And then he posted a picture of him walking back from the plane with a reference to the turn of the century television show Entourage, with a picture of him and his security detail and handlers walking behind him. And of course, just cringed it, but was effective in trying to shame reporters, and it will probably
It's interesting because this aspect of the campaign should become a part of the Trump Vance message. And if I were them, it would be, here are the questions that she hasn't answered that we need answers to, and it doesn't need a walking up to the plane. It can become, I think, a really compelling part of the stump speech.
Yes. She will not take questions. You would do content online, even in ads. Why won't she answer your questions? I can't tell, and of course, this inquiry may be obviated by events, but one starts to wonder, if she's not going to do an interview this week, does she wait until after the Democratic National Convention? Is she trying to make it all the way to the convention?
Oh, I absolutely think she's going as long as she can. They don't want to risk anything that could blunt her momentum. And this is a side note, but I watched the full Tuesday rally with Walz, at which Josh Shapiro, the runner-up to be the vice presidential nominee,
womp womp,
spoke first. And while I do believe that his Jewish faith and his views on Israel played some role in her decision, I also thought it gave greater insight into why he wasn't picked. I thought he came across terribly.
Okay.
He spoke first, and he came across, to me, and I'm not a swing voter, but as he read his command presence, as they would say, was very sharp and shrill and partisan.
Right.
Even though his policies are center-left. Whereas Walz, whose policies are left-left, didn't read that same way. I thought he read in a much less sort of sharp, partisan manner. And that was, I think, quite interesting.
Shapiro is a more moderate Democrat, but he is a Northeastern Democrat. He's a big city Democrat, and he reads more Democratic elite.
He reads like a New York Jew.
Well, yeah, sure.
I mean,
Philadelphia.
he's a Philly Jew,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he reads like a pushy New York Jew, saying that as someone, I'm a Minnesota Jew, but people say, oh, I thought you were from New York. Because I have the same kind of temperament, and I don't think I'd make a very good politician.
As a middle-aged white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, I am not going to offer any commentary on the kinds of Jews that are pushy or not pushy, but I will only say that Walz is, to use a term that is overused, folksy. He's folksy AF. Folksy is folks.
Well, okay, so given the rollout, that's the presentation.
Right.
Then we can get to the substance.
So I would like to pause here and point out to any conservatives who are listening, if you think that you hate the New York Times, just remember that the progressive left hates them even more. Headline from this blogger, Finding Gravity. New York Times helps J.D. Vance Swiftboat Tim Walz. Now, for context, Tim Walz served in the Army National Guard for 24 years. He was a command sergeant. He was in for a long time. And then he retired from the Army National Guard right before, and it wasn't after the orders came in, but it was predictable that orders were eventually going to come.
And
for
he
them.
acknowledged as much in press releases, in his campaign press releases, saying, if I'm called, I have a duty to serve in Iraq, and he didn't.
So this blogger, as typical, and I include it not because this is a blogger of great significance, but it well encapsulates the complaints of the progressive left.
Yeah, you can't attack his fabrications.
Right. New York.
He's played fast and loose with his military record. One is retiring right before his unit was called up and saying, if called, I have a duty to serve, and then not serving. The other is characterizing himself as a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom, which when you say that, people think Afghanistan.
Right.
And he
went to Europe in a support role.
Yes. He was deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in Italy, and was actually his aides were confronted in their office by an actual veteran of the campaign.
So this guy, this blogger used to work for Media Matters, and he refers to this as privileging the lie. And he says that the New York Times is privileging the lie when it put the headline, Vance attacks Walz's military record, accusing him of avoiding a tour in Iraq. But that seems to be true, right? It doesn't seem to be a lie at all. And what this blogger suggests is they should ignore it on the basis that it is a false claim and unworthy of attention. But it's not a false claim. They can adopt the false claim as the basis of their report, as they did, or they can produce a report centered on the fact that the candidate is saying something that is untrue. So your choices in this scenario are either ignore it, repeat a lie that you know to be a lie, or three, write a Republican pounce story, right? Your third option is to do a piece that talks about what Republicans are doing. And in this case, we would say Tim Walz has gotten a lot of benefit out of his military service politically. He's talked about it. He's used it. That's fine. And by the way, do you know what Tim Walz's response to
It's not has gotten.
Right.
They are currently selling it.
And do you know what Tim Walz's response to J.D. Vance was? He said, he thanked J.D. Vance for his service in Iraq and said, I appreciate you putting yourself in harm's way. He didn't obviously say, yeah, I totally ducked out because I was an old coot and didn't want to have to go to Iraq. I wanted to run for Congress. He did not say that, but I wouldn't expect that he would. But he did say, thanks for your service, JD. Appreciate you. And it's a fairly normal response. And by the way, kind of nice that he acknowledged Vance's service. And I include all this just to say the New York Times and other mainstream outlets, whose criticism do they hear more? Do they hear criticism from Fox News that says that they're biased? Or do they hear the criticism of Finding Gravity and other people who are ideologically more aligned. So they're always going to be more sensitive to criticism from within their tribe than from without of it.
My obsession gets to this and the way in which much of the mainstream is covering criticism of the criticism or unflattering stories, problematic stories.
That's a
about the
deep tease.
Democratic ticket.
Look at that
Yeah,
deep tease.
so
But what?
we'll come back to
But
it.
what about how folksy Tim Walz is? I acknowledge his folksiness. I am here. I stand foursquare. He is definitely a hunter. He is a Carhartt owner. He is, as his recent financial disclosures revealed, pretty broke. I mean, he's got a fat, sweet pension from all of his years of teaching school, and I'm sure that'll be fine. But he's got a net worth of like $100,000. And so for a person, how old is Walz? Probably 60? 60. So for a 60-year-old, $100,000 is not where you're looking to be.
60 but looks 70.
60 but looks 70. And does have, I'm sure, a wonderful pension thanks to Minnesota public schools. But the Aaron Sorkin-ness of Tim Walz's, and I'm stealing this in part from John Podhoretz, and I don't know whether I should. Well, he would. I don't think he'll care. Hi, John. But that basically Tim Walz is a progressive's idea of a conservative. What is the West Wing version of what an acceptable conservative is like? Well, first of all, they're not
someone who wears camo hats but wants tampons in
boys' yes.
Yeah, boys' bathrooms.
Exactly. Do you remember the TV show that ran for a while that had it was called Newsnight or something, and he was it was the guy from Dumb and Dumber, Jeff Daniels, played a former conservative television host. Was that The Newsroom? Yeah. Ugh, Sorkin. Ugh. And he had an epiphany one day and decided that he was going to attack. He was a lifelong Republican and would attack the Republican Party and call it out on all of its stuff. And it was like, well, you're just a Democrat, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being that. But there is a Sorkin-esque quality to who Tim Walz is. He is a guy who teases his daughter about being a vegetarian, but eats turkey burgers, not hamburgers. And this is a person who we used to know in American politics, and you should know very, very well based on who you are. He's a Minnesota Democrat. We've known Minnesota Democrats. Walter Mondale, Minnesota Democrat. Hubert H. Humphrey.
Paul Wellstone.
Yeah, Paul Wellstone. Hubert H. Humphrey, Minnesota Democrat. Minnesota is a progressive state. Amy Klobuchar is the distaff version of the same thing. But yes, there is hot dish. There is football enthusiasm. There is all of that stuff. But Minnesota has been a very progressive state for a very long time, going back to the progressive era.
There's a lot of reliance on his record in Congress.
Yes.
As opposed to his his more recent gubernatorial record.
As the lightly bearded Nate Moore and I were discussing earlier, the Harris, we talked about this vis-a-vis Donald Trump talking to the black journalist group. You go to groups like that not because it actually gets you those voters, but it helps voters, persuadable voters, feel better about who you are. So it is true that there's no record that Tim Walz did particularly well with rural voters, right? There isn't. His congressional district when he started running for it was a swing district. It was he replaced a Republican, and it was a competitive district. Yes.
He won rural voters when he was in the House. As in his gubernatorial runs, not really.
Right. So the new Tim Walz, who was a bold progressive in Minnesota, did not score well in rural precincts. But if the optics, if the semiotics of Tim Walz are, he's a man of the land, he's a kind of a Minnesota good old boy. If that's true, then that helps him with maybe not those voters, but voters who would like the idea of somebody who was not a coastal elite. And both campaigns we have a West Coast coastal elite at the top of the Democratic ticket. We have an East Coast coastal elite on the top of the Republican ticket. Both chose Midwesterners. Both chose heartland picks to send a message to to fly flags to different tribes.
And I think what's incumbent on the Trump campaign, and we'll see if they can pull it off, and I say this as somebody from the Twin Cities, is that Tim Walz and two excellent pollsters, data guys, Harry Enton and
the
Steve
great Harry
Kornacki,
Enton.
dug
my
into
two
this
friends, yes.
yesterday, that Tim Walz was elected on his strength in the urban areas of Minnesota. The elites of Minneapolis are not distinguishable in their views and predilections from coastal elites.
They're more progressive even than Massachusetts Democrats in some ways. They're more progressive than others. The Minnesota Democrats are very progressive, and Walz passed the biggest budget. He swung for the fences. And I can't remember the name of the Minnesota governor from long ago, from the 70s or 80s, who swung big and did it and then got this huge blowback for doing it. But Walz definitely saw himself as a transformative figure when he was governor of Minnesota, and he was gonna go for it. Now, I guess in a perfect world for Democrats, by the time we leave the convention 2 weeks hence, no one will think about Tim Walz. He will fade into a like, oh yeah, that guy. Who is that guy?
The other, I mean, maybe. However, he exacerbates Harris's weaknesses in that he is governed to the left, and the Trump campaign, to the extent it can make any consistent argument, is that she's far left and unrepresentative of the American people. I actually thought it would have been compelling had Shapiro been on the ticket. And, the question people were saying, well, he's going to have to just abandon everything he's ever said about all these things. And Pennsylvania is a big energy state. I thought it would have been compelling, first of all, if there were protests at the Democratic National Convention, for her to stand up. And she kind of did it at the rally yesterday and say, screw you. We don't have time for this right now. And second, for Shapiro to say, we don't agree on anything. This actually isn't going to be a White House where we all have to fall in line.
Right.
And this is a White House where, you're right, I'm for fracking. She wasn't, or whatever the issue is. And to say, we're going to sit down and talk about these issues.
But we agree on the big things that matter. We agree on the big things that matter.
I thought that would have been compelling.
And I'm going to be an advocate for blah, 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 blah. There's no doubt that J.D. Vance was an overconfident pick by Donald Trump, and I doubt he would have chosen J.D. Vance. I mean, seeing how bad he is at it, but also how the race was about to change, unbeknownst to Trump. But Walz, well, let me say this. Walz is a very safe pick. He's a very safe pick. He speaks to the base of his party. He is aimed at party unity, in the same way that Nikki Haley would have been a very safe pick for Donald Trump, right? Heel division with Nikki Haley. Or how about Doug Burgum? Doug Burgum would have been a very safe pick for Donald Trump. Try to unite the party a little bit and do that. Walz is an underconfident pick because, as you say, if you really wanted to play for the middle, if you wanted to go big, you would pick a moderate who, and this is my point. Walz is a safe pick, but the process of selecting him was incompetently done. Because if you were not going to pick Josh Shapiro, and I've talked to Democrats and believe them, I believe them when they say that Harris really was conflicted and torn and she wasn't sure and went with her gut. I believe it. I am absolutely willing to believe that she was torn between the two choices and ended up with the guy that she thought would suited her better. Fine. You do not dangle the vice presidency in front of the governor of the most important state and who is a member of a key constituency group, Jewish Americans, whose votes are extraordinarily important in Pennsylvania. You do not dangle that and then at the end say, I'm sorry, I decided to go with the safe pick. Because why, for whatever reason, she picked Tim Walz. She sided with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She, for whatever reason she did it, she ended up siding with progressives in her party, and it was an unforced error. If she wasn't going to pick Shapiro, she should have made that known to the press 2 weeks ago, right? And taken him out of the Derby.
She did not have the luxury of time. I actually don't really blame her for this. I mean, I think it was a big decision in terms of which direction the campaign was going to take, but this was done on such a tight timeline. So she would have had to broadcast the day after Biden bowed out of the race that she wasn't going to consider him. Once you vet the guy.
If you, as my old daddy used to say, the time to decide a deer, whether or not you want to kill a deer, is before you go hunting. So if you're thinking about picking the governor of Pennsylvania, right, you better be darn sure that that's the direction you want to go before you undertake it and before you float it and before you do those things. And unless there was a vetting problem with Shapiro, who I doubt there was a vetting problem with Shapiro.
No, I think there was an interview problem with Shapiro.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, 2 weeks from now, Tim Walz will be
and there was a vetting problem with Tim Walz.
There was, well, I'm sure they knew all. I'm sure they knew it all. I'm sure they were aware of all of these things, and decided that it was that.
But there were vetting problems with all the other.
Yeah. Mark Kelly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and all that stuff. So who would want to be considered for the vice presidency?
Someone whose wife didn't take out a restraining order against them and who didn't have a very, very contentious divorce.
Maybe, for example, that is the kind of person who might not want to do that.
Somebody who hasn't had numerous extramarital affairs.
For example, would be another for instance.
But, these are the people who represent us.
That's right. We get the government we deserve.
Well, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi, who has a new book out.
She has a book out?
Power. Yeah, that's why she's doing all these interviews. The Art of Power, which was written and sent to the press before she muscled Joe Biden out.
She sure did.
And now she's talking pretty freely about her views on that and doing some quite interesting interviews, one of which was with David Remnick of The New Yorker, the other with Paul Kane in The Washington Post. And what she tells The Washington Post is, now, I was really asking for a better campaign. We did not have a campaign that was on the path to victory. Members knew that in their districts. She continues, my goal in life was that man, she's talking about Trump, would never set foot in the White House again. She added that she couldn't stand to see an unfolding of events that were just putting rose petals in front of him to go there. Very interesting. And she criticizes his campaign operation, which was fascinating to me because guess who has the same campaign?
Well,
basically,
I think they're still in Delaware, but I think they are changing. I think the campaign is different.
This is amusing. Pelosi took a dismissive attitude toward one of Biden's longest-serving confidants, Mike Donilon, who has served as his presidential advisor, advertising scriptwriter, and top speechwriter. She denied press accounts that she and Biden had a talk in which they disputed polling data and suggested he put Donilon on the phone to go through the granular details. I didn't know what Donilon did over there. I get the brothers mixed up, as a matter of fact, she said, referencing his brother, Tom Donilon, who had served as foreign policy advisor to 3 Democratic presidents. I didn't even know what Donilon did. I thought he was a speechwriter. She said, yeah, I thought he was a speechwriter. Isn't he a speechwriter?
You burnt. And Pelosi, in an interview, with whom did she say he should be on Mount Rushmore? She said that looks like CBS Sunday Morning. And there's so You're familiar with the idea of chiefing somebody?
No, I'm not familiar.
So to chief someone is where you say, okay, chief, sounds good. It's Barack Obama once referred to Joe Biden as Sheriff Joe. That was top tier chiefing, right? Like, okay, chief. All right, Sheriff Joe. And Nancy Pelosi is chiefing Joe Biden. Oh, he's the best. He should be on Mount Rushmore. He's the best president we've ever had. And then goes and talks to David Remnick and is like, and here's how I killed him. Here's how I garroted the president of the United States. And as the Walz pick confirms, Nancy Pelosi is the most powerful individual in the Democratic Party by a pretty wide margin. For all of the talk around the Obamas and all of that stuff, this is a woman who has been flexing hard for, well, I mean, I guess you'd take it back to Obamacare, right? Since she jammed Obamacare through the House, deem it passed, she is the survivor and she is the most powerful force in her party. And one wonders, she is from the same place as Kamala Harris started her political career. One wonders how much latitude Pelosi will give Harris. If I was Harris, I would wonder. I would wonder the latitude that I had in these weeks of the campaign.
What do we got next?
Before we get to what's next, we do have a little breaking news to impart. And the Republicans sensed what you were saying and have responded. Donald Trump, this afternoon of this recording, will hold what he calls a general news conference.
Oh, yes. That's not breaking. Sorry.
Well, it was breaking to me.
Okay.
And so there is. So on the one hand, and we don't know how it will go. On the one hand, you have Trump putting pressure on Harris to do a press conference. On the other hand, you have the strong, some might even say iron likelihood that Donald Trump will say something to get the attention off of Tim Walz and his service record and his use of his preference for feminine hygiene product locations and onto something Donald Trump said.
We'll report back. But in the meantime, it was pretty amusing to see, Politico Playbook has these transitions that are typically about,
leaving Capitol Hill to go to a lobbying shop.
Yeah, exactly. This reporter is leaving the Washington Post for the New York Times, or in this case, Penny Pritzker stepped down as U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine's economic recovery. Kevin Lawson is now a senior policy advisor at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. He most recently was senior foreign policy advisor to Amy Klobuchar. And, oh yeah, Yahya Sinwar will assume leadership of Hamas in the wake of Haniya's assassination, the militant group announced today. Sinwar previously led Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Spotted.
Like, did no editor look at that and say, like, maybe transitions is not the place for this?
That's right. Spotted leading a militant terror group. Yes, amazing.
Pretty astonishing.
Yes.
Lack of self-awareness.
Also, kind of astonishing was Kamala Harris's willingness to tell pro-Palestinian protesters to shut up.
So, at her rally on Wednesday evening, she met with members of the uncommitted movement, which were
the protest
threatening
voters
votes away from Biden over his treatment of Israel. And nonetheless, they proceeded to make a ruckus during her rally. And let's
Kamala, you can't hide. We won't vote for genocide.
Let's play the clip.
He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking.
So that was interesting, and I think was good.
There's a couple ways to interpret the Walz pick. One is that she's going to try to do what Hillary Clinton did and go left and stay left. In 2016, Hillary Clinton stayed left, and she tried to win a base versus base election with Trump and lost because people didn't like her. And the other way to interpret the Walz pick is that she throws a bone to, and potentially mostly a symbolic one, to anti-Israel and progressive groups. Okay, I gave you what you want. Now, what I want is for you to shut up. Now I want you to let me rejigger my candidacy so that I am running to the middle. And this would be evidence of the latter.
However, she did make a misstep where she indicated that she was open to an arms embargo on Israel and left that open and had to send out her foreign policy advisor to clean that up.
What the vice president meant to say.
It's fine. What I found interesting, and this also happened after the protests during the Netanyahu speech that turned into the tearing down of an American flag near Union Station and vandalism there, are that these statements don't come from her. They're coming from her foreign policy advisor, who nobody knows who Phil Gordon is. So he put out a tweet cleaning this up, saying, "At VP has been clear. She will always ensure Israel is able to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. She does not support an arms embargo on Israel. She will continue to work to protect civilians in Gaza and to uphold international humanitarian law." So that's also an interesting dynamic that all the statements, the cleanup is coming from him on Twitter.
I want to point out the perils of media criticism. So so this is updated, but initially, and I don't know what day the first story was filed. I don't know the time the first story was filed, but Semaphore, Max Tanney, who's a good reporter at Semaphore, has a scoop, which is in January, the Wall Street Journal made an explosive claim. Quoting intelligence report, the paper reported that not only had 12 members of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, had taken part in the October 7th attack on Israel, but that 10% of the relief agency's 12,000 workers in Gaza had ties to militant groups. And the whole piece is how the Wall Street Journal admits that they don't have extra confirmation. And the suggestion is that that they had been duped by sources in Israel. And the story came out, I read it, and I thought, ooh, this looks bad for the Wall Street Journal. Like, is this real? And then hours later, headline.
Can I just
tell me anything?
Add something over the top here?
Yeah.
Anybody who's followed the UN closely,
which I do
for
not,
the past 10 years.
I do not.
Okay. And its role in this war would have read that journal story and known that it was true with absolute certainty.
I did not follow and did not know. And so when I saw the report, I said, Wall Street Journal, you in trouble. And then, oh no, so this is right. August 4th, the Semaphore piece comes out. August 5th, headline, Wall Street Journal, 9 UN workers fired after investigation found possible involvement in October 7th attack on Israel. So, womp womp.
Was the next day.
Was the less than 24 hours later, it was out. And that I had to feel for a reporter who was like, I think I've got him. I've nailed him. And then it was like, here you go.
So we'll wait for the Semaphore story acknowledging that.
Quite possibly they will. I don't know.
Well, there was an interesting incident relating to the breaking of the story about the prisoner swap that secured Evan Gershkovich's release from Russia and that of several other prisoners. in exchange for a lot of bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned that news outlets across the country had known that this deal was coming, but had agreed to an embargo so that they wouldn't publish the story while the prisoners remained in Russian custody.
Right.
So as not to endanger them. And Bloomberg News then posted the story. They broke the embargo, posted the story while the prisoners were still in custody. And that commenced an investigation inside Bloomberg as to what happened and to the dismissal of one of Bloomberg's reporters,
a high-profile reporter,
Jacobs, who was hired from out of Iowa, from the Des Moines Register. So the New York Times writes, Jennifer Jacobs, a senior White House reporter who had the first byline on the article, has left the company, according to 2 people with knowledge of the matter. An editor involved in the story was demoted, according to 2 people. And Jacobs put out a statement on Twitter that sort of, it's not totally clear to me what happened. She indicated that, she said, reporters don't always have control of the headlines that go on their stories or when they're published, making it wasn't a taking of responsibility for what happened. So she did not seem to think that she was at fault for this.
She hasn't issued she hasn't said, she didn't say she was fired. She didn't say she was quit. She quit. She didn't say anything. And the breaking of an embargo is serious. We take it seriously. And in a case like this is a prime example of the point of embargoes. You don't want to endanger anybody or endanger anything. And that's this is an interesting one to me. I find this very interesting.
And I would say the breaking of an embargo related to U.S. national security or the well-being of American citizens abroad is an even bigger deal.
Right. I don't know how I will be. Maybe I'll put it this way. perhaps Semaphore will also follow this. How did it really happen? What really went on here? And I'll be curious to know, and I'll be curious to see if Jacobs is vindicated.
Up next, we had Axios laying off 10% of its workforce, so 50 people out of about 500 employees. And the New York Times reported that the layoffs and that CEO Jim Vandehei sent out a note indicating the layoffs were due to changes in the media business, but it was in the Axios style.
This one just got right up my nose because you know how patronizing and annoying I find Axios' prompts to be. Why it matters. Be smart. Blah, 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 blah. And I get why this helps novice reporters write because they're giving them prompts to write to, and I understand. But let me tell you, if you're talking to adults about how they got fired, why their colleagues have been fired, don't do why it matters. Don't do the silly prompts. It's not cool. That's not a nice thing to do to people.
And we have no tears shed over this. CNN's quote unquote media reporter Oliver Darcy leaving the company and
we recently talked about him.
Substack.
We recently talked about him hosing CNN for.
This became routine. It started
fact checking. Yeah.
Well, it started with the CNN's decision to do an interview with Donald Trump.
Yes.
And he savaged his employer for doing that. He then savaged CNN for its failure to fact check the candidates during the debate. During the RNC. And so he is now striking out on his own. And Michael Grinbaum at the New York Times writes, just how big is the market for news about the news?
Huge. Huge.
That's a question that Oliver Darcy, a veteran media reporter, is poised to answer. He announced on Thursday that he would leave his longtime perch at CNN, where he writes the widely read Reliable Sources newsletter, to start an independent, subscription-based news site dedicated to the media industry. And I would say the real question is, how big is the market of criticism of the news of the mainstream media from the left? How big is it?
Brian Stelter, how's he doing?
Mr. Darcy. Well, Stelter, since leaving CNN, I would say, has moved a few ticks to the center.
Okay.
Mr. Darcy, 33, is tossing his fedora into a crowded ring. Puck, another digital outlet, has found success with bespoke emails focused on media gossip in Manhattan, Hollywood, and Washington. Semaphore recently debuted a media-focused podcast, Mixed Signals, and The Hollywood Reporter beefed up its media coverage this year. Mr. Darcy's new venture, called Status, will be similar to the daily media digest that he helped lead for 4 years at CNN, with a mix of reporting and analysis. Topics will range from Silicon Valley to presidential politics to the effects of artificial intelligence technology on news consumption.
Well, we'll keep track. We will keep track.
Should we talk about the trans boxer? Not trans, the hermaphroditic boxer.
I was not ready for that. I will confess.
That is the situation.
Is that correct?
Yes. It's a person with female genitalia but XY chromosomes.
Okay. All right. Good.
So it's
there we go.
It's actually a complicated case.
It sounds extraordinarily complicated.
And it was covered as man boxing, but this is actually one of the rare cases that was quite complicated.
Okay.
And I think, sort of tough to get right. So Vox opines, however, that discrimination against trans Olympians has roots in Nazi Germany.
Good to know.
And they write, Michael Waters, author of The Other Olympians, Fascism, Queerness, and the Making of Modern Sports, also pinpoints where and when that changed, specifically at the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany. Armed with a propensity for eugenics, gender anxiety, and a startling lack of scientific evidence, a small set of Nazi officials influenced the International Olympic Committee into gender surveillance and trans panic. Gender surveillance is actually what they have to do. Like, these athletes have to submit to a lot of tests.
Right. That's
in order for them to ensure fair play and an even
Michael
playing
Phelps
field.
cannot put on a wig and show up and say, I'd like to race the ladies.
Stuff that eerily mirrors the transphobic attacks that athletes, cis and trans alike, face today. What was so interesting to me is that these current Olympic sex testing or eligibility policies have their historical roots in 1936. Meanwhile, this is the Olympics that did allow this person to compete in boxing to a huge
But people who are concerned about it have their roots in Nazism.
And those historical roots, really, I think, are in this anxiety over women athletes.
Well, Hitler was a vegetarian. So the roots of vegetarianism are in the Third Reich. The roots of vegetarianism rest with Adolf Hitler, and modern non-meat eaters draw their origins from Hitler's refusal to eat meat, and I think it's just obvious. Also, they wore pants, and pants have their origins in Nazi Germany, and our preference for pants is fascist. It's just as obvious as you can see. If you want, though, a good discussion of the 1936 Olympics, I proffer to you Malcolm Gladwell's podcast series on the 1936 Olympics, which I am listening to and enjoying mightily. Good archival footage or good archival audio, great backstories. I won't give away the big reveal on Jesse Owens, but lots of good stuff. It can be done well, and there is no mention of gender policing.
Chris, that brings us to our style section.
I'm ready.
Where the Wall Street Journal reports that luxury brands are betting on ties again. Oh. Here's why neckwear means money. But you're going to have to read me in on this.
How's it look? Looking good. So ties are all over the runways, we are told, I guess. And so these days, it seems you're more likely to spot a tie on a runway than in an office. Slivers of silk have adorned models' necks at countless menswear shows this year. Both those of luxury houses like Prada and Emporio Armani, and cool smaller players such as Japan's Orly. Many are not statement ties, but blink and you'll miss some designs in somber solids that blend in with their companion shirts. May I say, there is nothing. No, there are many things that I find more offensive in men's clothing, but there is little that I find more offensive in men's clothing than guys who look like they have gotten dressed for work and then failed to put on a necktie. They wear a solid or plain colored shirt. I'm glad I wore a tie today. They wear a solid or plain colored shirt. They wear like a blue business suit or a gray business suit, or heaven forfend, a pinstripe suit. And then they just leave their collar open. And it looks like they didn't finish getting dressed. Now, if you want to wear no tie, you can do it. It can be done. But you should wear something interesting. You should wear a stripy shirt, a colorful shirt, an interesting shirt. You should wear a pattern jacket. You should do something else. But don't just wear a business suit and then fail to put on a necktie. Neckties are great. Neckties are a way to show a little personality, show a little pizzazz. And men's clothing is boring, and I like the boringness of men's clothing, and ties offer a little chance to do it. So I, for one, welcome. For one, you'll be unsurprised to hear, welcome the return of the necktie.
Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week. Where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And I wanted to talk about two different stories, both in the New York Times, that I think speak to how the Harris campaign is being covered when the news is not good for the campaign. The first is about Tim Walz's decision to sign a law requiring sanitary products to be put in both girls' and boys' bathrooms in schools. And the headline of the Times story is, Trump campaign criticizes Walz for state law providing tampons in schools.
Okay.
So I actually clicked on that because I thought, wow, that doesn't sound like a bad law.
Right.
Tampons in schools? Like, that makes sense. And then you read into it, and first, the framing of the story is Trump campaign criticizes.
Sure.
But what did the law actually do? So when you read into the story, the law, which was passed in Minnesota last year, includes language requiring menstrual products to be available in bathrooms of all schools for grades 4 to 12 as a way to accommodate transgender students. And the article says, as a part of their effort to portray Tim Walz, the new Democratic vice presidential candidate, as a far-left liberal, the Trump campaign attacked the Minnesota governor on Tuesday for signing a bill last year that provides access to menstrual products for transgender students. The law says that products used for menstruation must be available to all menstruating students in restrooms regularly used by students in grades 4 to 12. Okay, that's actually a pretty left-wing radical view to say we should have tampons in boys' bathrooms.
Okay.
And I like how they characterize the language, that they say the language of the law is broadly inclusive. There are some people who feel excluded by that language. And at no point, and the headline is just grossly misleading.
Republicans pounce. Well, we heard from
and also,
the Media Matters guy about what are the three forms that you can take. They took the third form, which is to attack the allegation.
You would have no idea from the headline what the controversy actually is here.
Mm-hmm.
The second is similar, and it's
Here
a story about...
Put your listening ears on.
The story broke in the Daily Mail.
Yes.
And the Daily Mail reported that Doug Emhoff, during his first marriage, had an affair and impregnated his daughter's third grade teacher,
who was also
moonlighting as their nanny.
Yes.
And then he got divorced.
Yes.
And Emhoff acknowledged this.
Cop to it.
Though he did not acknowledge the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. He also did not deny it.
Right.
He said, during my first marriage, Kirsten and I went through some tough times. What's one way to put it? On account of my actions. I took responsibility, and in the years since, we worked through things as a family and have come out stronger on the other side. Well, the New York Times headline is, Doug Emhoff, husband of Kamala Harris, acknowledges long ago affair. And again, I thought, and the subheadline is, the relationship with the teacher at his children's elementary school occurred when he was married to his first wife years before he met Ms. Harris. And I thought, that's interesting. There's no mention in this entire story that the allegation is actually he got her pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And who cares if he had an affair in his first marriage? That's actually seems not to be the issue here, at least in my reading of it. And when I read this story, I thought if you were going to write something that was designed to clean this up for Mr. Emhoff, it would be this.
The story, and it was interesting to see how it went. When it first broke, I thought, oh, this is a big problem for Doug Emhoff. They're running as the virtue people, and this is an unvirtuous thing, and it reinforces that he is a Hollywood entertainment lawyer, which is arguably, the least likable. If you were to describe one profession that would be the least relatable and likable, Hollywood entertainment lawyer below on the list. And then it didn't ever take off. I kept waiting for the story to take off, and then I remembered something. Donald Trump. Then I remembered, oh, right. If the biggest news around you for the year so far has been your lengthy trial for paying hush money to a sex worker with whom you had an assignation while your wife was recuperating from her childbirth of your son, then Republican. So it was an insight to me politically on how much things have changed, which is this is something that Republicans would have gone bananas with before, and it's sort of just they let it slide past.
It's true that Trump cannot be the messenger of attacks against this. Although I'm actually not even sure that's true, because Emhoff has taken an extremely public role as the first gentleman and is out there doing interviews about toxic masculinity. So it's a hypocrisy story. Donald Trump isn't out there portraying himself as a savior to women. Okay?
No,
I think
for
it's
sure
pretty
not.
clear
Yeah.
about the fact that he's an equal opportunity offender.
Yeah.
Doug Emhoff, on the other hand, is all about girl power.
Yes.
And so a story like this undercuts the politics that he's...
Who was the last candidate who was done in by an affair?
Again, I don't think the story was really about an affair.
Right. No. Or sexual indiscretion. I'm sincerely asking, can you, Nate Moore, can you think of anything?
Well, it's not been great for Donald Trump.
Cal Cunningham in North Carolina. Yeah, okay, John Edwards.
And
Johnny
it has
Ed.
not been great for Donald Trump.
No, it's true.
Yes, he survived, but it's hardly been an asset to his campaign.
Well, I've heard that everything helps Donald Trump. You get indicted, you do everything helps Donald. I heard it. Everything helps Donald Trump. Nothing harms him.
The indictment helped him, but the Stormy Daniels situation, I don't think has been super helpful to him.
I likened the other day talking about Donald Trump and how things work out for him. That Donald Trump, and I think this was in the context of the Society of Black Journalists, was Donald Trump is like getting a pet orangutan. Republicans got a pet orangutan. They fed him a few beers, and he's going to wreck your furniture. He's going to beat you up. He's going to break all the stuff. There's going to be orangutan doo-doo everywhere. It's going to be a problem. What do you do if you have a tipsy orangutan as a pet? You make the best of it that you can. You put it on TikTok. You sell people the chance to fight it. So good things can be made out of a bad situation. But yeah, that's generally the situation Republicans are in with Trump.
What's your obsession?
Oh, it's kind of a follow. And this will continue. This continues to be my obsession. I'm truly obsessed with this question. of what AI means to the news business and what the news business means to AI. I said I would follow up last week talking about the legislation that was proposed about what to do about name, image, and likeness stuff on AI. And I did my homework, which means I asked smart people who know. And the answer is not great legislation because basically it's just creating new causes of action. It's not like a Section 230 answer. It wasn't the answer. But here is something from Axios. And it is AI startup raises $25 million, inks deals with major media companies. A handful of major news and music companies have agreed to license their content to ProRata AI, a generative AI startup that claims it can accurately attribute and share revenues with content owners from AI chatbot subscriptions. And we've talked about this before. There are currently two major ways that the news industry is dealing with AI. AI uses news archives to learn and to generate, right? And the rapacious hunger of artificial intelligence for content, the best place to get all that content are in the back pages and archives of news organizations. Do you fight them or do you cooperate with them? The New York Times is suing and fighting to keep its intellectual property its own. News Corp is partnering, right? They cut a deal with OpenAI. I think it was OpenAI. They cut a deal. Here's a third way, which is doing it yourself and partnering with this new company and hope that they can make it better. And I would just say the potential for AI in the world of news and information is enormous. The upsides are enormous. We have focused a lot lately, understandably, about how deep fakes and fake news and all of that stuff and Elon Musk, I get it. I understand what the dis and misinformational problems are. Totally stipulate. But I keep thinking about what AI can mean for news, especially local news, and how in resource-starved parts of the country where local news coverage has been obliterated, AI can make this much, much better and can provide a higher degree of news coverage, better services to more places in the country. And I think that's really good. And what it's going to take is coming up with Section 230, much maligned, was a framework that said you can sue people who put bad content, willfully bad content, defamatory content on social media platforms or the internet, but you can't sue the people who host it. That's at the heart of what Section 230 is you can sue the poster, but you cannot sue the platform. And it cleared it up and gave us the huge boom, whatever you think of it, in social media and how we know and understand the internet today. For AI to be good, we're going to need a framework like that draws clear rules of the road for how civil actions and how we navigate these things. There's probably enough intellectual property law out there to get through, and we can have case law that will sort it out. But it would be very helpful if we had some clear rules of the road. I promise I will continue, America, to bore you with this topic week after week, because I don't think there is a bigger issue facing the news business right now than whether or not our industry is able to harness and effectively use artificial intelligence.
Chris, that brings us to my favorite portion of the week,
which
is Reader Mail. And we have a note from MB on the East Coast who writes, Dear Eliana and Chris, First, let me say that yours is one of my favorite weekly indulgences. Thanks for always keeping your cool and giving us a rational perspective on the news.
Okay.
Since you're both fashionistas and clearly have better style sense than 99% of our fellow Americans, I'd love to hear your thoughts on a particular fashion trend that started about 5 years ago and simply will not run out of gas, if this most recent apparel trade show at America's Mart in Atlanta is any indication. Virtually every female buyer here is wearing one of those floor-length, multi-tiered Little House on the Prairie meets Sister Wives dresses.
Nah.
Many of them with the multiple layered ruffles on the shoulders or big puff sleeves, most in fabrics that recall outdated upholstery or the Depression-era feed sacks that my great-great-grandmother cut up to make quilts. And when I say every, I mean women from 18 to 80. All of them in ruffles and tiers, some looking like over-the-top birthday cakes. Talk about age-inappropriate dressing. No 80-year-old woman should be wearing puff sleeves and ruffles. And on their feet, sneakers. I'm willing to give them a pass on those as we are at market and it's a great deal of walking. As a designer who makes classically tailored dresses that celebrate the feminine form, I've avoided going this route, hoping that this trend will die a long overdue death. It appears it's going to be with us for at least one more season, and I'm wondering if I should give up on women wearing clothing that accentuates their positives and even hides nature's little flaws, and just accept that we're all going to hide under these tents forever. So what say you two? Flattering and fashion forward, or time to show a little leg?
What do you say? I've never seen you in a Sister Wives dress.
I'm actually not big on ruffles. I'm not big on puff sleeves, and I'm not big on generally on full-length dresses, except for maybe black tie. But I'm not a ruffle and super girly dresser, so these are not for me.
I would love to see MB's dresses. I'm very curious because she obviously has a great sense of style. So MB, I hope you'll break your anonymity and share with us some of your dresses. I would love to see it. And I will say, my Jessica dresses very well. She is good at wearing clothes. And she does wear some kind of long, she doesn't do the Sister Wives dresses with the Little House on the Prairie energy, but she does do a caftan. She will do a long and flowy kind of thing for more casual stuff. But I tend to agree that the feed sack motif is played.
I'm into long and sleek.
Long and sleek. All right, like an otter.
No, ruffles are not for me.
Not for you.
Chris, that brings us to your favorite time of the week.
Hooray.
I am forced to say something nice. Show me the way.
I like this piece in the New York Times by Patricia Mazzari, who went to the Villages, and golf cart politics. Florida retirees flaunt loyalties to Trump and Harris. In the Villages, Florida's retirement mecca, pro-Trump residents have been galvanized by a surprising showing of support for Kamala Harris. So many pieces have been written about the Villages and Trumpism and blah, 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 blah. And I got to say, this piece was surprisingly sweet. It was surprisingly nice and treated it. Look at this picture of that dog. Look at that dog. This was not a story about the end of America, right? This was not a story about like what is wrong with the boomers. This was not a story about that. It had a kind of quaint vibe about, dare I say, positive partisanship in an era of negative partisanship. It captured a little slice of positive partisanship, and I thought it was sweet, and I thought it was good, and I thought the art was fabulous, and I'm here for it.
Well, my favorite story was an inside look at the Ismail Haniyeh assassination by the Israelis, published in London's Jewish Chronicle. And it was fascinating. They report that the bomb, we had heard that it was placed there months before, the bomb under his bed in this guest house where he was staying. But the Jewish Chronicle reports that it actually, that the Mossad turned two members of the security team that manned this house, and that they placed the bomb the day of. And they write, 3 minutes later, the guards, who were offered a 6-figure sum each as well as immediate relocation to a northern European country, were captured on camera calmly leaving the room, going down the stairs towards the main entrance of the building, leaving and then getting into a black car. The guard at the parking lot checkpoint recognized them and opened the gate without asking any questions. An hour later, they were smuggled out of Iran by the Mossad. Following the decision to carry out Haniya's assassination, the Mossad began searching for a suitable opportunity to strike. It emerged when Haniya was invited to Tehran for the new Iranian president's inauguration. The Mossad, with the assistance of Intelligence Unit 8200, the IDF unit responsible for clandestine operations, intercepted phone calls between the organizers of the inauguration and invited guests. When Haniya confirmed his arrival, the Mossad began executing the plan. So, very, very interesting.
And cool.
Cool.
It's cool.
Very cool. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.